All right, good morning and welcome here. Glad you had a chance to make it today. The people in the United States who were old enough to remember World War II when it was going on are a population that is really dwindling. Okay, we're rapidly running out of those people. And what I have for you today is somebody who's not only old enough to remember World War II, but was caught right slap in the middle of it, in the worst possible end of it that you could want to be in. Now, some of y'all have had the opportunity to learn some things about the Holocaust. And in the United States, what we usually teach the students about the Holocaust is about what the Germans did to mostly the Jewish population and some other people too. And there were some folks that helped the Germans do these things to people. And one of the reasons why we tend to focus on what the Germans did to the Jewish people is because not only was it terrible and horrific, and we should all learn about that to make sure that we never let that kind of thing happen again, but also because the Germans were very insistent on keeping records of what they did, and they took lots of pictures. And that works really well if you're trying to show something on a movie, a documentary, pictures in a textbook, things like that. And also you had American and British soldiers invading at the end of the war who discovered the evidence of what the Germans had done, and they recorded things in English, which makes it easier for us. Because we tend to focus on that, and because we usually have very little time to spend on the details of World War II, most Americans never even learn much about what happened in Eastern Europe at the same time to the people that were not Jews. Because the stereotypical rounding up people and stuffing them into a cattle car and hauling them off somewhere where they're going to be worked to death, exterminated, things like that, that's horrific. But in America, we almost always associate that with the Jewish population. It's actually a lot more people that suffer the same fate. And what we're going to find today is that we're speaking here with Mr. Stanley Opalka, who's a new resident of Somerville. He's only lived here for a few months. And, well, this is somebody that rode in those same boxcars. This is somebody that went to those same kinds of camps. But the people that put him there were not the Nazis. They were actually the Soviets. So this is a version of the story that most Americans, not just school kids, most Americans are completely unfamiliar with. So today, I introduce to you Mr. Stanley Opalka. And I'm going to show you a little bit about his story, and then I'm going to turn this over to him because I can't tell it the way he does. Now, Mr. Opalka is 90 years old. 90, okay? 90. He's built like a weightlifter, and his mind is still sharp, has a sense of humor and all that kind of thing. But the story of Mr. Opalka starts when he's 7 years old. He's born in Poland, and he's 7 years old when World War II begins. This is the Polish flag before World War II. Where he lived is in the southeastern part of Poland. And in our world history books, we usually teach about World War II begins when the Nazis, the Germans, invade Poland. And what we usually sort of brush right past without mentioning is it's also the Soviets invading Poland from the other side at the same time. Okay? Now, so the Soviets are invading from the east while the Germans are invading from the west. Mr. Opalka happens to live in the area that's occupied by the Soviets instead of being occupied by the Nazis. Okay? Now, the Nazis and the Soviets had come up with an agreement on how they were going to divide up Poland. They drew a line down the middle of it. If you lived in the west, then you fall into the hands of the Nazis. Okay? Hopefully you're kind of familiar with what that means if you fall into the hands of the Nazis, because the Nazis are not really nice to the people that are under their control by a long shot. They ended up exterminating somewhere in the vicinity of 6 million Jews and about 15 million people overall. But the folks that are on the east side of that line under Soviet control are the ones that Americans usually don't learn much about. Next slide. Okay, well, one night, a few months after the invasion, soldiers show up, Soviet soldiers, round up Mr. Stanley and his entire family at gunpoint, give them half an hour to pack anything they're taking with them, hauled them down to the train station, stuffed them into a railroad car, slammed the door, and they don't know where they're going. They don't know where this trip ends or how it goes. All they know is everything that they didn't have with them when they got tossed into the railroad car is gone forever. Well, where they end up being hauled away to is thousands of miles to the east to a little place called Tomsk, and then they're sent even farther north from there up by the Arctic Circle into the coldest part of Siberian Russia, and that's where they're put into a slave labor camp. And the main work there was chopping down trees and then shipping them downriver to be turned into lumber and things like that. But they are slowly being worked to death while they're freezing to death, and conditions are just terrible. While they're there, the Nazis invade the Soviet Union. Now, this isn't going to do anything for liberating them from a camp. They are thousands of miles from where the Nazis are invading the Soviet Union. And even if they'd fallen under the hands of the Nazis, then life is still bad. But they're a long ways away. What this had to do with Mr. Stanley and his family is that the Soviets think they're about to lose the war. And they're so desperate for help from anybody that they're offering to do whatever it takes to get the help. And the British said, hey, we'll help you out, but only if you let loose all those people that you took prisoner in Poland. Now, the Soviets had no real intention of letting their slave labor go, but they really needed the help. And so they're at least going to go through the motions of pretending to let the Polish people go in order to get the help that they need to win the war. And the help that they need to win the war is a lot. They end up getting so much from the United States that eventually they're able to beat these Germans, but only because of all the help that they got from the British and the United States. Now, months go by, and the Opalka family is still freezing to death in Siberia, regardless of any Russian promises. So Stanley's dad takes it into his own hands and just sneaks out with the family one night. What happens if they get caught? They're dead. But you know, you got a choice. You sit here and slowly die, or take your chances and you maybe die now, or maybe you get away. And his dad led them out of Siberia. Well, where they wind up at is thousands of miles away, and they had managed to get themselves onto some trains that were heading south, because west is towards the war, east is into more freezing, and so south seemed like a good choice. And, well, they eventually have to get off the train because they're about to starve to death. You see, in the Soviet Union, you were rewarded with food in return for work. They're not in a place where they're working because they're actively trying to get away, and therefore they're about to die from starvation. So when they get off, the only way there is to get food is to work, and they wind up on a different slave labor camp working cotton fields in Uzbekistan. Except conditions there are terrible. Instead of freezing to death, it's hot, you're on the edge of a desert, and the place where they're given to stay is so infested with fleas that the whole family ends up getting sick with typhus. And his dad dies from typhus. His little brother, baby brother, dies from starvation and disease and all that. And when his mom and his sister manage to not die from typhus, barely, she made the decision to get what was left of her family out. So in the middle of the night one night, they sneak out again, this time heading west. Well, before they did that, I forgot this slide. While they were still living in Uzbekistan, one of the things that helped shape Mr. Opalka, there was a Jewish couple that were sent to live in the same slave labor camp. And one day, this gang of kids and teenagers show up and just beat them to death with rocks. Just because. And when Mr. Stanley asked him why, because he doesn't know if he's next, the answer is, oh, they were Jews. So, yeah. You see, the Nazis would murder you because you're Jews. The Soviets would murder you not caring that you were Jews. You're still just as dead. But the people in the slave labor camps sometimes would still murder you because you're a Jew. Not the guards, the people that you're in the camp with. So, that's tough, man. But anyway, she led him west, away from the camp. 800 miles later across the desert. Yeah, 800 miles. A woman, her teenage daughter, and 2 little boys. They wind up at the Caspian Sea. And they follow along the shores of that until they find a cargo ship that was loading up to head out. His mom pulled a little trick and managed to smuggle her children onto the cargo ship. And then, before the ship left, went up to the people at the docks and said, "Hey, my kids are sneaked onto that ship. I gotta go get them." And they let her up on the ship, and then she hid until the ship left, and that's how they got out of the Soviet Union. They wound up in a place called Iran, which was not a evil Muslim dictatorship yet. Instead, it was actually under the control of the British at the time, and the British were like, what are we supposed to do with you? So they end up getting shipped to British India, the part we now call Pakistan. And from there, the British were planning to ship them to Kenya in Africa. And then there was a little mix-up in transportation, and they wound up on a different ship that didn't take them there. Instead, it brought them to Mexico, which is nowhere remotely close to Kenya, but this worked out. And so he lived there in Mexico for the entire rest of World War II. And then when World War II was over with, then they were able to get in touch with a distant relative who they hadn't seen in decades, who had moved up to New York long before there ever was a war. And they were able to get permission to travel up there. And, well, when he finally got to Utica, New York, was the first time, at the age of 14, that he ever had a chance to go to school. Now, there's some of y'all sitting here that would probably be really happy to not have to go to school tomorrow. But you're talking about somebody who's already got that tons of life experience that y'all are hoping to get someday, and he's never had the chance to go to school up to this point. Well, from there, he's a soldier in the U.S. Army in the 1950s, a professional golfer on the PGA Tour in the 1960s, and then goes on to a career of 30 years teaching history. Now, sometimes we have history teachers that go from sitting in a classroom to sitting in a college classroom to standing in front of a high school classroom, and the only thing they know to teach you is what they read in a book. By the time this guy was standing in front of a classroom, he has lived history, which is why he was rather celebrated for his creativity and methods. He wasn't just any old history teacher. So, there's a little video here that was made about his life. Check this out.
entire track lasted for 10 days, until we reached those cities. This game goes on of controlling one human over the other because you think the other person is a threat to you. And I suppose that's why you see so much viciousness going on. Will it continue to be that way? Because that's what humans are. They're those vicious, aggressive, irresponsible things living in this world. Animals are not as bad as the humans can be. Because they're terrible to one another. We kill for ideas and kill millions because you think that you're making value. The more millions you kill, you tend to forget the individual person in the million. Stalin agreed to give us amnesty because leave Siberia. The invasion of Russia by German armies. That's what made it possible. Look what we said was it. $10 billion worth of equipment and food. And in Russia, all kids learn that Russia is German.
Right.
Without this, you couldn't be any.
Right.
And Stalin has no choice. You're helping them all. And helping the soldiers. Except, how can you free the soldiers when you already killed them? You may remember that happened.
It was Monsters Massacre, right?
So here we have 24,000 Polish officers executed with a bullet in the back of the head.
Your father has to believe when you lived in the camp?
Oh yeah, you can see the whole family still intact. It says here it was still alive, which is a miracle. And so he finds out I'm not going to have my kids with how much country. He finds a hunter who has a horse and a sled. It takes him about 2 days to get to the railroad station. And finally, we're moving south. Onward and onward, 3,000 miles. And the food is running out. My younger brother died. And they tell us we should settle on a collective farm. It was a worse place, worse than Siberia.
And that's what your father died.
And my brother died. Mother and my sister goes to the hospital, and I, who am 9, and my brother is 6. We had to live by ourselves. It was springtime in April. The boys killed a guy, Jewish person, inside. When he opened the door, he just killed him with stones. In the meantime, we are watching, thinking we're next. Another person got to the place, the lady who had 2 daughters, both of them died, and she eventually committed suicide because she didn't know any way out. So when mother gets back, she's planning how to follow where her father began. Mother rents out an Arba pulled by a camel, and we leave the collective farm. Eventually we reach the Caspian Sea. Mother watches how people get on the ship. The civilians go with the military family. So she says, see this woman here? She has disabled children. He says to me, you go stand in line behind her. See? And says, you know, I'm lost, I'm an orphan. The guy says, papers. She says, papers. Now who's he? She doesn't know what to do. He's my son. Mother says, same routine for my younger brother, and eventually my sister, the older sister. when we're out there in the ship, we're waving to her. And she comes up to the people on the desk, she says, "Those are my children." And so the guy says, "Okay, go."
Yeah.
And then that's quite a scene there. I think forgetting is the whole essence of things. Forgetting and also forgiving, but it should not be forgotten. We have to move on. If we lived in our past, life would be terrible. Adversity. You don't confront adversity. You avoid it, move around it, and keep on going. It's a beautiful world, even in the worst situation.
I want to introduce to you today, Mr. Stanley Opalka.
What an introduction. How can I ever do a better job in telling you what happened to me in my talk? It's hard to be different because life is the same whether you're on a screen or you hear from me as a person. Dzień dobry. Jak wy pożywajecie? Buenos dias. Good morning.
Good morning.
That's English. Good morning. These are expressions of greetings in different languages. First it's in Polish, then in Russian, then Spanish, then English. I have lived in these countries where I had to learn their languages if one was to succeed in life. So it will be with you. We are living in a global society today. Many of you here, you will travel in your lifetime. You will travel beyond Somerville, where knowledge of another language that you will learn other than English will serve you well. So, when you are at your age, learn another language besides your own. Today, we are going to talk history. What is history? History is everything that happened in the past, written and unwritten. Do you like studying history?
Yes.
Some do, some don't. Studying about colorful kings and about dates and about wars can be boring. But by knowing history, we may be able to explain why things turn out the way they did. Or you may learn why we fight wars. Or what mistakes to avoid. Or what examples to follow. If not, the events of the day will lead you to disappointment and failure. It is true that in personal life, as well in the history of world affairs. Just for example, the nature of history itself. A recent story in history is about Afghanistan. Maybe we should have learned a lesson from history. More than 2,000 years ago, the great conqueror, Alexander the Great, who supposedly had conquered the known world in his time, he's been to Afghanistan 2 centuries ago, not 2 centuries, 200,000 years ago. And he had difficulty subduing Afghan people. Later on in time, the British, in the colonial period, they also tried to control Afghanistan. They couldn't do it. In more recent time, the Russians were in Afghanistan. They stayed there 10 years. They got beaten badly and went home. And then, after all that, the Americans go to Afghanistan. Maybe we should have learned a lesson. Should have left earlier than 20 years there. At the end, we came home. So that's how history works. We should learn from past performance. Everyone knows the well-known concept of history, that is that history repeats itself. We had a war going on in Europe. War in Ukraine, where Russians invaded that country, destroying buildings, killing innocent people, capturing others and sending them to labor camps in Siberia. That same thing happened 80 years ago when Russia and Germany invaded Poland in 1939, starting World War II. Can we conclude that the war in Ukraine may be a start of World War III? History. Well, my name is Stanley Opalka. I wrote this book, Escape from Russia. It's a true story of World War II. As already been mentioned, that the book is about a 7-year-old boy, that's me, with his family is arrested and deported by the KGB secret police to a forced labor camp. So, a lot of what I may say today has already been said, so I have to be selective, try not to repeat what already has been said. I got lucky. I got out of Russia, out of Siberia, by going to Iran, and then eventually around the world to Mexico, and eventually in 1946, the family of 4, out of the family of 8, 4 died in Russia. We arrived in the United States. In 1954, I became an American citizen. It took me 7 years to come to America. America for me, became a land of opportunity. I had to catch up my education. I finished high school, went to Syracuse University where I studied history and education, graduating with master's degree. I was a history teacher, and while teaching, I would tell my students in classes how lucky they were to be living in America. It's not so elsewhere. At times, I would tell my students what was it like to be living in Poland in 1939, where World War II began. I was born in the eastern part of Poland, in the town of Medica. I and my family lived on a small farm. We were 8 of us. Father worked the land. We had 2 horses, 2 milk cows, pigs, chickens, dogs. We had a fruit orchard. In 1936, Father built a new home made of bricks. We lived a good life, going to church, celebrating holidays. Then World War II starts. In September 1939, I was about to start school, but because of the war, the school never opened. I saw German planes drop bombs on the defenseless city of Przemysl. And soon after, the German tanks reached Medica. But they stayed only a short while and moved on. In their place, Russian soldiers appeared. Well, as I mentioned in the opening, that the known fact that on August 23rd, 1939, 2 weeks before the shooting part of the war, the Germany and Russia signed a secret document called the Soviet-Nazi Pact, which was to divide Eastern Europe among themselves. But to start with, they attacked Poland. Poland was defeated. It was no match against the 2 powerful neighbors. We in Medica fell under Russian occupation. So, to mention, on February 10th, 1940, at 5 o'clock in the morning, 3 Russian soldiers appeared with fixed bayonets and rifles. They knocked on the door and forced themselves into the house. And when they're saying then, screamed, Father woke up, was made to stand facing the wall. Children wake up. Soldier speaks up. All of you must pack. You have half an hour and you are being relocated. The soldier continued, get children dressed in warm clothes. And Father speaks up. What is happening? Where are we going? Pack enough food, all you need to know. Father was made to go to the barn to spring a horse to a wagon. After a while, when we were ready, Mother with small children got inside the wagon, and the rest walked behind the wagon. To the railroad station, the soldier commanded. So we reached the railroad station in Medica. It was still dark. We could see many neighbors also there. So eventually we were told to go into the freight train that was waiting for us. I'm going to make sure that I don't repeat the same story again, but anyway, in the freight car, inside of the freight car, I was divided into two sections with an open space in the middle. There was one pot-bellied stove for heating. There was no toilet facility except a hole in the floor of the freight car. Anybody who had to use a paper had to relieve themselves. This was the only toilet there was. There was no privacy. In our rail car, there were some 40 people squeezed together. Families, lack of hygiene, cold, no food. Some people died on the train. People inside cried, others prayed. Many were in stupor. All their life's work was left behind. I watched my father holding his head, thinking of the circumstance that we were in, thinking about our home that we left behind, thinking about farm animals and who would feed them. He knew we were going to Siberia. In my talk, there's so much about that I'd like to share with you about the experiences, but we just don't have enough time. So nobody likes long speeches. So the train leaving Poland was moving eastward. We got into Trans-Siberian Railroad line. Then we passed the city of Ufa and Omsk and Ural Mountains and Novosibirsk and Tomsk. And then sleds and horses. And after some 2 weeks of travel, we reached our labor camp, Narva. The camp, as has been said already, is close in the Arctic Circle of Arctic. Siberia. Siberia is a large landmass, twice as large as the United States, located in the northern Asia. Siberia is rich in natural resources. It also has the coldest climate in the world, many times reaching minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Siberia also is known as the biggest prison in the world, where Russia sends its unwanted people. Our labor camp. When we arrived at the campsite, there were several barracks there, surrounded by trees and snow. We lived in deplorable conditions. People slept on piled-up beds 3 stories high, lice, bed bugs covering everyone. Living in close quarters brought on sickness and death. People died that way. On the second day of our stay in the camp, the commandant of the camp introduced himself and posted rules of the camp. Labor. People were assigned to work in the forest, cutting trees down with hand tools. High norms were set up. People worked beyond endurance. Meager food allotment, lack of proper clothes, working in cold temperatures, that was predictable for many. I, as a boy, 7 years boy, children could run around in a camp without any restrictions. While there, I contracted night blindness, couldn't see when it got dark because of the improper diet. Also, I almost lost my leg. Boiling water with pail was tipped over and got into my leg, and my leg got all boils, and they thought they had to amputate the leg, but the gangrene set in. But there were some people who had skills in primitive medicine. Somehow I survived that. Also, I got caught in the blizzard, in the snow, going to school. Somebody found me, brought me in to revive me. School. All children under 13 years had to go to school, where a program of Russification was put in place. Students had to learn how to read and write in Russian. We were told how great Stalin was and how lucky we were to be living in Soviet Union. Gulag. What is Gulag? It's a network of labor camps. A book like this tells you all about how Russians operate their prison system, written by Anne Applebaum. If you want to read about the truth of Russia, you get it from this book. Recent studies show that there were about 476 major prison centers in Russia, 2,000 colonies, and most of these were located in the northern part of Russia. It is difficult to get there and even more difficult to escape. Most of the prisoners were political in nature. What that means is that he committed a crime against the state. The prisoners were not only Russian, but represented the multitude of nationalists from around the world. It should be noted that at the end of World War II, the Nazi camps were closed. Russian camps were never closed. For that matter, Nazism is gone. Communism is still alive in Russia. Putin is a communist. Cotton Forest Massacre. At the start of World War II, Russia captured 240,000 Polish soldiers. These Polish soldiers, while in Russian hands, were separated non-commissioned rank from the officers' group. And the officers' group were led to cotton forest near the city of Smolensk. And on Stalin's order, all of them were shot. 22,000 of them, hands tied in the back. 22,000. The Russian soldiers used German ammunition to do the killing. Later, when the graves were discovered, the Russians blamed the crime on the Germans. And the United States at that time believed the Russian story, even though we have the evidence contrary to that. Because this is what's happening in Russia today in Ukraine. The Russian propaganda says that the United States is doing the killing in Ukraine. So, as mentioned before, on June 22nd, German invasion of Russia. Hitler was once a friend of Stalin. They signed an agreement, fighting together. This time, Hitler double-crossed Stalin and moved German armies against Russia. In no time, German armies were in control of European Russia. Leningrad was surrounded. And German soldiers only 12 miles from Moscow, the capital city. The Russian dream to conquer the world with communist ideas made Russia hopeless. The Grand Alliance. Russia, finding itself in this difficult situation, losing the war with the Germans, appeals to the Western Allies, as was mentioned. A Grand Alliance was signed, where Russia joined the Western Allies on certain conditions. So Russia gets help from the United States, as mentioned, and one account that I think Mr. Farrell mentioned what Russia asked for from the United States, 125 million pairs of shoes. Russian soldiers had no shoes. Anyway, eventually the alliance was signed, and but Stalin had to apologize, and we recognized Polish government. What he had to do eventually, organize Polish army on Russian soil, and also the amnesty factor came in, where the Poles deported to Siberia should be set free. So, should we believe Stalin to all that he agreed? Hardly so. Some people of means began to pack right away, and others, mothers with children, father, they couldn't leave, but my father decided that he's going to leave Siberia. Except Rina Camp is far away from any civilization as mentioned, but he learned that nearby lived a fur trader who had a horse and a sled. When asked, he said he'll take us to the nearest railroad station in Tomsk. And so that's when we got there, and once we got to as far as Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, not Afghanistan, Uzbekistan. And it was already mentioned, Uzbekistan was worse than Siberia. The plague of typhus prevailed in the area. My 2 brothers died, and also my father died. Mother was left with 3 children. Then she got sick with my sister, and there was only 2 of us. I was 9 at that time, my brother was 7. We had to live on our own because my mother and sister went to a hospital. So here we are, 2 little kids, trying to keep ourselves alive. And eventually mother returned. And that's where we packed again. We heard about the Polish army post not too far away. We reached that and eventually reached a port of Krasnodar on the Caspian Sea. Then a freighter ship, we already got that. And then onward to Iran. And Iran, eventually, we stayed there about 6 months, and we eventually got to Pakistan and Bombay, India. And there, by some chance, there was an American troop carrier there that waited for American wounded soldiers that came from the front in Africa. And we found out there was some empty space there. And that's, we got on the ship Hermitage that was going from Bombay, India, around Pacific, to Hawaii, to San Diego, and we eventually ended up in Mexico. And I lived 3 years in Mexico. So to conclude, Russia is a country with its own morality. It committed crime against humanity when it started the World War II, which Germany invaded Poland. Number 2, Russia committed war crimes when it killed 22,000 Polish officers in a cotton forest. Russia also committed crime against peace when it deported 2 million Poles to labor camp in Siberia. Still today, Russia has not been brought to an account for these crimes. Still today, Russia is killing children, dropping bombs on schools in Ukraine, dropping bombs on shopping centers, killing civilians, arresting others, sending them to labor camps in Siberia while fighting the war. So to conclude, I feel obligated to speak about these and people who suffered, people who perished in labor camps in Russia, and preserve the truth of those events for future generations. It's for you, how you react to Russia today in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you, Mr. Opalka. We do have a little bit of time left today, so we've covered a huge, long story in a whole big stretch time, and he went off into some other topics and things, but there's so much to this that hasn't been brought up. Little things like he spent so much time starving as a kid, unable to get things as simple as bread, that he never developed a taste for it, doesn't even care for it much today because he never learned to eat it at a time when it was the most common thing for people to eat, at least for the people with food. If you have questions about life under those conditions, his experiences, even his later, like, he was a golf pro, things along those lines, then now's your time. And I'll bring the microphone over to you for answers necessary, so you don't have to keep getting into whatever. All right, so who's got questions? All right, I saw him right there first. Yeah.
What were your siblings' names?
Sorry?
What were your siblings' names?
What were the names of your brothers and sisters?
The youngest one, going to Siberia, was only 6 months old. It's a bullet. Next one was 3 years old. He was Edek. Then there was me, Stasha. And then was my sister, Dana. Then was my brother, Longin. And the oldest brother is Tadek. And then mother and father. There's 8 of us.
Now, the oldest brother that you mentioned there, he actually wound up going away into the army in World War II, right?
This is an interesting thing. I don't know, did you guys read the papers today? Probably not, you're too early. But I see Russian tanks are left empty. The Russian soldiers are running away. 42 tanks they just left behind. There's a Russian method of fighting. My oldest brother, Ted, he was 19 at that time. He was eventually captured by the Russians and conscripted into Russian army. And what kind of army was it then? In Russia, the people, they were formed what they call punitive battalions. You know what the word punitive means? That means you're going to be sent in the front line fighting against a machine gun, and you have no other choice except to go forward, because if you don't go forward, you're going to get killed from the back. So that's the method the Russians fight. So you can see why Russian soldiers in fighting in Ukraine, they're all leaving their tanks and surrendering to the Ukrainians. So a soldier has to have a reason for fighting. He doesn't understand why Russia should be fighting Ukrainians. But Ukrainians, what do you think? Who's going to win? Biden or Putin? I think Biden's going to win. Thank you.
Yeah, the Soviet army, the people on the front lines are told to charge. Their job is to absorb bullets so that the bullets don't hit the soldiers the Soviets actually want to use for something. That's what happened with his oldest brother. He thought his oldest brother was dead, had died in the war. It was 1962, 63 when his brother turned up and actually wasn't dead. So, pleasant surprise. All right, next question. Yeah. How hard was it for you to learn other languages?
You are very ready right now to learn language quickly. Do it right now. You'll know another language will help you immensely in your future life. Most of you, good many of you, will not stay in Somerville forever. I mean, you're going to be going around the world. The sooner you get to learn another language, it will serve you well. How long depends on each person, how much effort you're going to put in. But a young mind can learn language very quickly.
What else you got? Yeah.
Wrong.
When you went through the tough stuff, you mentioned about some people went crazy with suicide. Did they ever talk about it?
In the war, people think soldiers fight the war. But the people that do most of the time are civilians. Children, parents. In fact, in my family, half the family died. And you eventually in other words, my father wanted to leave Siberia. He didn't want his children to live in a communist country forever. The people who died are not the ones who are educated with university degrees. In survival, you have to learn the tactics of survival. And what the tactics are, you gotta keep your eyes open, you gotta listen, you gotta watch, take chances when you have to. Standing still is no good, you gotta be on the move. So that was my experience. A lot of people, of course, died, and it was just impossible to survive.
The folks that die are the ones that don't develop the skills to stay alive. To answer your question. All right, next. Yes, sir. How many pro golf tournaments did you participate in?
When I got to America, I already had experience in survival. Coming to America, what a country. Unbelievable. Somebody like me, had no education, I eventually been successful, probably the most successful American ever lived. Coming here, I came to a family of golfers. In other words, I lived in Mexico. I found out that my mother had a sister who lived in Utica, New York. And they came here during the Great Migration period some time ago. So that family, the Kroll family, we lived right next to the golf course. And so pretty soon, they took me out to the golf course. I started caddying. And caddying, eventually golf became my ticket to become a better American. This is how you become the mainstream American. So I took up golf right away. At the age 18, I turned pro, and eventually, first tournament I entered, I shot 66, and then eventually second round I came in second. It got to be fairly good at the game. And then I told my mother, I think I want to become a pro golfer. And she says, how are you going to make a living? Well, some people go, well, you're not some people. You better give up golf and go to school. So I gave up golf and went to school, which was a better procedure. But in the meantime, I always kept my interest in golf. So I played some pro tournaments, but I didn't make enough money to buy an orange. So I gave up golf and went to school instead.
Not enough money to buy an orange. Okay. All right, next. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry? What are your hobbies now?
What is my hobbies now? I do want to mention my daughter's here, son-in-law here, and they thought when I turned a certain age that I better find myself a nice place to live, so I chose Somerville. And my hobbies now, prepare for this program here. I still like to play golf, but at my age, when I hit a golf ball, it doesn't go where I'm aiming. What's the point? So, but it's still my hobby. And outside of that, when you turn my age, I'm also 90 years old, there are some limits, but I enjoy my life just as well. Thank you.
How do you find the strength to get through the things you did
When you're 7 years old, your world is how it is when you're 7. I mean, you enjoy things at the time that you're living. And what you have to do is learn how to adapt your age. At your age, your mind is the quickest it's ever going to be. Don't goof it up. I mean, learn all that you can. at your own age and your own ability, because you're going to be history pretty soon. In fact, yesterday is history. I mean, today is only a line. So if you goof it up now, it's gonna cost you later. See, so take advantage of opportunities that are available, and they're all over, and you just have to look for them. See, don't give up.
Okay, you get another person because they're having. I saw it. Yes, back there. Yeah.
Okay, so this is just kind of off topic, but Sir mentioned that you didn't know what the case was bread, but I want to know what your favorite Polish food is.
What's your favorite Polish food?
If you go to Poland, that's where the Polish food is. Because a lot of people who migrated to the United States during the early 1900s, whether you were Polish or you were Irish or you were Italian or any other nationality, the people who came here, they came here for work. In other words, the places where they lived, they were uneducated, and when they came to America, they were illiterate, and the only thing that they brought with them are diet or certain foods, like say pierogi, right? There you go. In other words, it's a peasant type of mentality that eventually people will get to know about Italian pizza. That's not Italian best food. You go to Italy, let me tell you, there's good food in Italy that we don't have in America. Same thing with Polish food as well. If you go to those countries, the origin of it, that's why you're going to travel. And maybe someday you will go to Poland and you'll see the menus over there that are not what most people think is in America.
It's sort of like, don't go to Taco Bell thinking this is Mexican food. Okay. If you eat spaghetti and we think of that as Italian food, in Italy it doesn't normally have meat. So the idea is that the American version of foreign foods isn't really like the real foreign food. So say if you really want to know what Polish food is, go to Poland. Way in back.
Is it true that aerosecurity is a major part of the war?
Can't hear you.
Is it true that air superiority is a major part of wars?
Yes. Next question. Yes. Yeah.
I guess was it difficult to adjust to no longer having a constantly acting?
Was it difficult to adjust to not having to live under conditions like the Soviet Union?
The key of success is adaptability. Every person has to adapt to one situation. And you have to, in other words, trouble comes in when you want to be something that you're not. Be who you are and learn how to adapt, and then the life will go on that way. So, in other words, a child doesn't think, if you're 3 years old, you can't think that my life is no good. I mean, that's a child way of thinking. When you're 7, and then you think that age. And so when you are your age, you better be quick and take advantage of opportunities that are all around. A lot of people not a lot, some people make excuses. In America, so many things are possible that they're not like that elsewhere. And that's why we all come to America. We all came to America.
the idea is that you don't necessarily have a choice to adapt. You just do it. Right. Way in the back. Yeah, you.
Do you have, are any of your,
Speak up.
Are any of your siblings still alive?
Are any of your brothers or sisters still alive?
Well, all passed away. There was the four that survived here. My brother passed away, and my sister passed away. I have a brother who lives in San Antonio. He's an engineer, education. He went to RPI, in Albany, in New York, and we're doing well. And we're enjoying life as much as you can. And when you're 90, there are some limits.
All right. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever met anyone that didn't believe that the Holocaust actually happened?
Have you ever met anyone who didn't believe that events like what happened to your family didn't happen? Or anybody who didn't believe that the Holocaust happened, or things like that?
I'm sort of the novelty. Not too many people survived Gulag. Gulag, the labor camps in Russia. There are stories in the past where people made some daring escapes. Like everybody else who ever survived Gulag are a rare occasion. What was the question again?
Have you ever met anybody who didn't believe about?
Yeah. So if you don't believe, you got to read some of the books. Here's a book, Mass Deportation of Poles to Siberia. And it shows you the people who have survived, they give their testimony of their survival. So if you don't want to believe, it's a belief. But you look at the facts. The fact is that it did happen. I went through it, and I can even show you the scar on my leg that were hot boiling water spilled on it. So, I mean, there's a proof that it happened.
There are some people out there that no matter what kind of evidence you show them, they're going to choose to not believe for their own purposes. You can't fix that. Okay. Yes? Yeah, you.
So this might be a little bit personal, but do you struggle with any type of PTSD or trauma now?
Do you think that you suffer today from any of the effects of things like that?
I think that was quite well explained at the introduction over here. What was the question again?
Do you think that you suffer today from any of the effects?
Yeah, the whole skill of learning how to forget. In order to forget, you've got to learn the new thing that you had to forget. So I work very hard how to become a better American and learn what life is like over here. And in other words, the bad things, good that human beings are good enough to know how to forget. So some things are worthwhile. It's a skill that you have to know and to eliminate things you don't need, but you have to be able to grab something that is new and worthwhile in your life.
If you haven't caught on yet, this entire presentation is about things that are a lot easier said than done, and showing you that they can be done. All right, questions? Yes?
Have you ever returned to Poland?
Yeah, he did. He went back, he did a graduate work in Poland and things like that. I'll let him tell you. She wants to know about your return to Poland.
Yes, I did eventually. I've been to Poland several times. First, I want to return to find out what happened to our farm And well, the house we lived in, when they took it apart and built a bakery out of the bricks from our house. There was nothing but depression from our home. And also, you mentioned I worked on my doctorate degree, a sabbatical leave as a teacher from high school. And then also, there's something that's happening right now. There's a movie being made of my book.
Hey guys, Wave TV.
So, somewhere if you get hold of this book, you'll find out in the movie.
I know y'all gotta go to lunch. If anybody wants to stick around to